There's a specific kind of silence that happens right after you close someone else's Instagram profile. Not a peaceful silence. A cold one. The kind that sits on your chest like a damp cloth. Heavy, slightly suffocating, impossible to shake off. You weren't even looking for anything. You were just scrolling, killing time between one obligation and the next. And then, without warning, you landed on someone's life, or whatever carefully curated fragment of it they chose to display, and something inside you shifted, something small but precise, like a needle finding exactly the right nerve. They're your age, maybe younger, and yet, you see, you didn't feel hatred. You didn't even feel envy exactly. Not the loud, ugly kind that announces itself. What you felt was quieter, more insidious, a slow creeping whisper that said, "You are behind." That said, "You are less." That didn't need to explain itself, because it arrived already fully formed, already completely believed. You put the phone face down on the table. The ceiling doesn't have answers. You already know that, but you stare at it anyway, because looking anywhere else requires acknowledging the feeling still sitting on your sternum. Dense, wordless, shameful. And the shame is the worst part, isn't it? Not the comparison itself, but the fact that you know you're doing it. You know it's irrational. You've read the articles, you've heard the advice, and it happens anyway. Every single time. Here's what nobody tells you when they hand you the standard prescription of just unfollow toxic accounts and practice gratitude. The comparison didn't start with social media. It didn't start with television or with glossy magazines or with the neighbor who bought a newer car. The comparison started approximately 200,000 years before any of those things existed. And the part of your brain doing the comparing right now, the part that made your stomach drop when you saw their follower count, their promotion, their effortless jaw, that part is not broken. That part saved your ancestors' lives. That low hum of inadequacy you've been quietly ashamed of your entire life, it was, once, the sharpest survival tool your species had ever evolved. Imagine a firelight, small, fragile, fighting against a darkness so complete it had physical weight. Somewhere in what we now call Southern Africa, roughly 70,000 years ago, a group of maybe 30 humans sits clustered around that fire, not sitting comfortably, crouching, alert, with the particular tension of bodies that understand, on a cellular level, that the night is not safe. The savanna breathes around them. Something moves in the grass, maybe 40 meters out. Nobody sleeps deeply here. Nobody truly relaxes. Listen, in this world, you are not an individual. The concept doesn't exist yet. Not in the way you experience it now, alone in your apartment, with your particular anxieties and your particular ceiling. You are a node, a single point in a web of 30 bodies that collectively constitute your only chance of survival. The group hunts together. The group mourns together. The group decides, through 1,000 unspoken negotiations of status and hierarchy, who eats first, who sleeps closest to the fire, who gets to reproduce and pass their particular arrangement of proteins forward into the next generation. And this is where it begins. Because in that world, cold, dark, and different, your position within the group was not a matter of ego. It was a matter of oxygen, a matter of whether your children would have enough food in winter. Status in the Pleistocene was the difference between your genetic line continuing or quietly, permanently, dissolving into nothing. The calculus was that simple, that brutal, that clean. So your brain developed a system, a constant, automatic, never-sleeping monitoring system, dedicated entirely to one question: where do I stand? It scanned the group continuously. It measured, it compared. Who is stronger than me? Who is more skilled? Who does the elder trust more? Who laughed when he spoke, and who was ignored? This system ran underneath every conscious thought, like a river beneath ice, invisible, but always moving, always pulling. And when it detected that your status had slipped, when it noticed that someone else was being groomed for a role you needed, that someone else had caught the admiration of someone important, It triggered an alarm. That alarm felt exactly like what you felt looking at that Instagram profile. That tight, cold, wordless sensation of being behind, of being less, of the ground shifting slightly beneath your feet. You see, the brain didn't experience it as social comparison. It experienced it as danger, because in that firelit world, it was danger. Losing status in a group of 30 meant losing access to resources. It meant your children ate last. It meant, in the worst cases, exile. And exile on the Pleistocene savanna was not a dramatic narrative choice. It was a quiet death sentence, written in 3 to 5 days of exposure and predation. The feeling wasn't weakness. It was the most sophisticated alarm system biology had ever constructed. A real-time, automatic, emotionally encoded global positioning system that told you exactly where you stood in the only map that mattered, the social hierarchy of your tribe. Animals that ignored this signal didn't survive long enough to pass it on. Animals that felt it acutely, that responded to it urgently, that let it reshape their behavior. Those animals climbed. Those animals ate. Those animals became, eventually, after an almost incomprehensible number of generations of brutal selection, you. The inadequacy you feel is not a flaw introduced by modern culture. It is an ancient inheritance, precise, deliberate, 70,000 years old, and still running perfectly, in an environment it was never designed for. In 1954, a social psychologist named Leon Festinger published a paper that would quietly become one of the most unsettling documents in the history of behavioral science. He wasn't studying social media, obviously. He was studying something far more fundamental, the raw, mechanical process by which human beings construct their sense of self. His theory was elegant in the way that truly disturbing ideas often are. Clean. Almost too simple. He called it social comparison theory, and what it proposed was this. Humans do not evaluate themselves in absolute terms. We have no internal thermometer for worth, no fixed scale for intelligence, competence, or value. We are, in his words, driven by a fundamental need to evaluate our opinions and abilities. And we do this exclusively by measuring ourselves against other people, not against an objective standard, against each other. Think about what that actually means. It means your sense of how intelligent you are is not a fact. It is a calculation, a ratio, constantly being updated, constantly being revised, entirely dependent on who happens to be standing next to you at any given moment. Put a brilliant mind in a room full of Nobel laureates and watch the confidence drain from their face like color from a wound. Place that same person in a different room, and they become the gravitational center of every conversation. The intelligence didn't change. The comparison changed. But here is where it gets darker. In 1998, a team of researchers at the National Institutes of Health, led by neuroscientist Caroline Zink, conducted a series of experiments using functional magnetic resonance imaging scanners, machines that translate the brain's electrical storms into something we can see, something we can point at. They placed participants in simulated social hierarchies and monitored which regions of the brain activated when subjects perceived themselves as lower in status than someone else. The results were not subtle. The brain regions that lit up were not the regions associated with abstract thought or rational evaluation, or even emotion in the complex philosophical sense. They were the regions associated with threat detection, the same ancient circuitry that responds to a predator, the same alarm system that floods your body with cortisol when you hear a sound in a dark alley. Your nervous system, in 2024, still cannot distinguish between a lion in the grass and a colleague who got promoted ahead of you. It processes both as survival threats. It responds to both with the same cold, chest-tightening cascade of stress hormones. Listen, because here is where it becomes almost unbearable in its precision. In 2010, psychologist Sonia Lyubomirsky at the University of California published findings showing that chronic social comparison, the kind that runs quietly in the background of a modern human life, fed by an endless stream of curated information about other people's achievements, was one of the strongest predictors of depression and generalized anxiety disorder, stronger than economic hardship in many studied populations, stronger than physical illness. The mechanism destroying your peace of mind was forged to save your life, and now it runs, without interruption, without rest, without the ability to distinguish real threats from digital ones, processing approximately 100,000 pieces of social information per day in an environment that delivers those pieces at a volume and velocity that no nervous system in the history of biology has ever been asked to absorb. Your brain is doing exactly what it was built to do. It is doing it at a scale that is quietly, methodically, pulling you apart from the inside. So here you are, a 70,000-year-old alarm system housed inside a body that orders food through a screen, that measures its own worth in rectangular photographs, that sits alone in climate-controlled rooms, processing more social information before noon than your ancestors absorbed in an entire lifetime. You are not weak. You are not broken. You are not uniquely damaged by some personal failure of character or discipline. You are a deep-sea creature living at the surface. Think about that. The anglerfish, that ancient, horrifying, magnificent thing, evolved its bioluminescent lure in total darkness, under pressures that would collapse a human ribcage like paper. It is a perfect machine, extraordinarily calibrated for its environment. Pull it to the surface, into the light, into the wrong pressure, the wrong temperature, the wrong context, and that same perfect machine comes apart. Not because it failed, because it was never built for where it now finds itself. That is you, not a broken human. A perfectly constructed Pleistocene primate, surfaced too fast. In water it was never designed to breathe. You see, the advice you've been given your entire life, compare yourself only to who you were yesterday, practice gratitude, limit your screen time. None of it is wrong exactly. But it treats a biological architecture as though it were a bad habit. It asks an anglerfish to simply choose, through willpower and mindfulness, to be comfortable at the surface. And sometimes that works. Partially, temporarily. But the pressure differential doesn't disappear because you've decided to ignore it. What changes things? Not completely, never completely, but meaningfully, is understanding the mechanism. Not fighting it, not shaming it, not performing elaborate rituals of self-improvement designed to silence it, just recognizing it for what it is. An ancient voice speaking an ancient language in a world that no longer speaks it. When that cold, needle-precise feeling arrives the next time, and it will arrive, it was never going to stop arriving. You can, for just a moment, hear it differently, not as evidence of your inadequacy, as evidence of your ancestry. That feeling is 200,000 years old. It survived ice ages and famines and the slow grinding extinction of everything around it. It outlasted entire species. It crossed oceans in the bodies of people who had no word for ocean. It is, in a very specific and non-metaphorical sense, the reason you exist at all. Because every ancestor who felt it acutely enough to respond survived. Every ancestor who didn't, you inherited it because it worked. And now you carry it through supermarkets with fluorescent lighting, through comment sections, through performance reviews, through every quietly devastating moment of scrolling through someone else's highlight reel at 2 a.m. You carry it not because you are doing something wrong. You carry it because you are still, impossibly, against all reasonable odds, alive. The inadequacy was never yours. It was always the species. You just happened to be the one alive today in this particular body, at this particular moment in history, feeling it on behalf of everyone who came before you, and everyone who someday will come after.